guys, so June is over. Don't know how that happened, but it is, and that means I'm here to do my end of month reading wrap up. As always, I have been doing mid-month wrap-ups, so if you're interested in the books I read in the first half of the month, I will link that wrap-up down below. There was quite a few because I participated in the Queer Lit Readathon, which meant that I sort of was pushed to read a few more books than usual, although I think I've still read a fair amount in this second half. This has definitely been one of my best reading months, if you count quantity as best, of the year. But I actually also have read some of my favourite books this month, which is wonderful, and I will very shortly be uploading my favourite books of 2019 so far. One of those, though, I can spoil that for you, is the first book I'm going to talk about, and that is the 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This book I borrowed from the library, not having read any Diane Setterfield before. She has 3 novels currently out, and I 100% am going to be getting my hands on copies or borrowing copies of the other 2 because I love this book. 5 out of 5 stars, one of the best books I've read this year. One of the best books I've ever read, maybe? I loved it. It was a beautifully, eloquently written book. I think you could easily categorise it as literary fiction if that's your criteria for literary fiction. It was also a complex plot with complex characters. You know, it just ticked all of the boxes. Basically what's going on in this story is that our central character is a woman who has been brought up basically living in a bookshop. Her dad runs an antiquarian bookshop and she's been helping him out since she was very young, and she now, as an adult, helps run that bookshop, and his main business is actually sourcing rare books for clients. She loves reading, and she's also a bit of an amateur biographer, so she's published short biographies of random people from throughout history because she just loves reading about kind of ordinary lives and recounting those and researching those. And because of that amateur work that she's been conducting, she gets a letter from one of the world's most famous authors in this fictional world, called Vita Winter. Now, she has written countless books that everybody seems to love, but our protagonist has never read one before, and this author has gotten in touch with her to say she finally wants to tell the real story of her life. For decades she has been giving journalists completely different accounts of her life that are impossible to all be true, and she said, you know, she's older now and she has come to the point where she wants to tell her own story, and she wants our protagonist to be the person to write that down, to memorialise that and make it a real piece of writing. So our protagonist isn't, sure whether she wants to do this or not, so she reads some of this author's books and she's like, wow, these are amazing. She goes to meet with her. At first she's wondering, does she want to be a biographer for somebody who seems to be a bit of a compulsive liar? But then the author says something that holds her attention, which is that her story, the author's story, is the story of twins. And our protagonist found out when she was younger that she was actually one of 2 twins who were born naturally to her parents, but her sister died, so she is a twin without her twin, and she is immediately drawn to this story. And basically we are learning the mystery of this author's life as she decides to tell it, which means she's dropping hints here and there at things that will happen later. We know a few things about her current life that we're trying to understand how we got to this point, and it's all centred around this house, Angelfield, where she grew up, and it's so mysterious and so intriguing, very dark in moments, but also kind of about connection, and I loved it. I found it very difficult to summarise my love for it. I think my love for it was very much invested in how compulsive it was to read. I could not put this book down. How I was constantly wondering about this woman's life and guessing at things, sometimes getting things right, but never fully understanding, because I never felt like the author gave me too much information, which meant it was all obvious. I always felt like there was a mystery. I was always on tenterhooks, and I always wanted to know more about this woman and her childhood growing up. And it was so clever. There were so many twists and turns. I think just the way it worked out was perfect, and I think it worked out perfectly both in the wrapping up of this story that we're hearing from the author, but also the way in which contemporary events for the contemporary characters of the book work out. I think there was like a really good balance between those two narratives and their eventual sort of stringing together. I think she really, you know, managed that balance really well. I think she made really interesting characters with our protagonist and with our author, and then with all of the side characters. I'm just so impressed by Diane Setterfield as a writer. Completely blown away. Like, I'd heard good things about this book, but I had no idea I would love it as much as I did. It's the kind of book which I could definitely see myself rereading, but before that I'm definitely going to read her other two books. Let me know if you have read either of them. I did read some other excellent books this month, and the next one of those is Daughter of the Sun by Effie Calvin, which is the second in the Tales of Inthea series. So if you've watched my first wrap up for this month, then you'll know I read the first book in this series, which is The Queen of Laria. Now this is currently a trilogy. It has at least one more book coming out in it, so it's not, you know, a trilogy forever. But at the moment there are 3 books out, and I have now read the other 2 books that are out, which obviously means I enjoyed them. Am I going to read 3 books in a series in the space of 1 month if I am not enjoying those books or invested in those characters' lives? No, of course not. So, as I mentioned in my first wrap up for this month, I really enjoyed The Queen of Laria, and I don't know if I enjoyed The Daughter of the Sun more, but I enjoyed it equally. They were both excellent fantasy queer romance books. If those are your genres, if those are the things you're looking for in a book, that's what these books are, and they do it perfectly. Now, they're, you know, PG romances, you know, so if you're looking for more smutty romances, that's not what these books are, but they are still gorgeous romances where the development of the relationship between the 2 central female characters in both of these books is central and really fascinating to watch. And I really like the way that Effie Calvin shows us the development of these 2 women's attractions to one another. And I don't think I've made it clear here, but the second book in the series actually follows 2 completely different central characters. So the second book in this series is set in the same magical world of various different magical kingdoms that are, you know, holding alliances and warring with one another and trying to defend themselves against magical beasts like dragons that might want to invade. And in the background of this we have, you know, various different characters who serve different functions in society, and in this second book we don't follow royalty. Instead we follow 2 main female characters, one of whom is actually a minor goddess and the other of whom is basically someone that wanders the land seeking out minor gods and goddesses or other like mythical creatures that are causing havoc and destroying lives throughout their world and defeating them on behalf of the church that she works for. Now, religion is very central to these novels, and I love the detail that Effie Calvin has included in creating these different religious cults. So it, for me, very much mirrors Greek religion, ancient Greek religion, ancient Greek cults, in that there's different churches, different temples to different gods, and they all have their different areas, and they are a big part of the humans' lives. And in fact, they sometimes, like I mentioned with the second book, find themselves walking amongst the mortals, and I love that. I don't know what it is it just because it reminds me of Greek mythology? No, because I think it's also just done expertly well in this fantasy world, but of course that is something that I'm going to enjoy, that, you know, second-hand allusion to ancient mythology. And I just really like that. And I love the relationship of the 2 characters in this book as much as I adored the relationship of the characters in the first book. Just perfection. They were just lovely. You know, they found themselves off adventuring together, falling in love, and I was here for it. The third book, The Queen of Rhodia, actually returns to the central 2 female characters from the first book. So we jump forward to what is now going on in their lives, but very nicely, I thought, the 2 main characters from book 2 are side characters in this book. So although the second book follows different characters, I think you need to read these books in order because they do follow ongoing events in this magical world. and then they do become side characters in each other's stories. I don't actually know which characters book 4 follows, if it follows the original 2, the second 2, all 4 are new characters, and I'll be really intrigued to see, but I am really invested in the stories of the characters from book 2, so I really hope they remain central in some respect. The more I reflect on it, I very much am thinking of them as a whole at this point, because they are also novellas, so they're quite short. And I'm just thinking of the series as a whole, and for me as a whole it's a 5-star series thus far, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. But my next book actually kind of feels like cheating, although I don't really believe in cheating when counting your books, but it is very short, and I don't think it's over 20 pages. I don't think there's page numbers, but I don't think it's over 20 pages, and it's a graphic novel. But that is this pamphlet, which is Beneath the Dead Oak Tree by Emily Carroll. So I've read one of Emily Carroll's complete graphic novels, and I think she has at least one more full, you know, chunky hardback graphic novel out there that I really want to check out, because this just reminded me how much I love her graphic art style, but also the tone of her work. So it's very dark, very creepy, but also always ends with an incredible twist to the story. So because this is so short, I can't say too much about the plot, but it's basically about, you know, like an aristocratic woman who is invited to meet this aristocratic man at one of his balls, to meet him beneath the dead oak tree. And she can't decide whether to do that, and I won't say any more or not about what happens. Does she go, does she not? What happens beneath the oak tree? You'll have to read it to find out, but the art is stunning. Like, look at that. Also, I find it fascinating that she's decided to make all the characters foxes. I kind of love that little, you know, switcheroo that she's done there, not just like bog standard humans. Who needs them? But I love these drawings. I'm not going to show you anymore because that will just like ruin the story for you. But if you like beautiful art, creepy little stories, then definitely check out Emily Carroll's work in general, and this pamphlet was wonderful. Then last but not least was Outrun the Wind by Elizabeth Tammy. This was another queer novel. I managed to read almost, you know, I would say like 80 or 90% of what I read in June was queer, which is wonderful because it is Pride Month, but this one was actually a retelling of Greek mythology. So it was a retelling of the myths of Atalanta, who was a Greek heroine. So there aren't a lot of ancient mythological Greek female warriors or heroines in the stories, but Atalanta is one of those few. So I was so excited to read a retelling of her story. This is a young adult book with, again, a female-female romance at its centre, which develops between Atalanta and one of the goddess Artemis's warrior. It is a what is it called? It's a enemies to lovers. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say they're enemies at the beginning, but they don't like each other at the beginning, to falling in love with one another's story. So, like, I know some people particularly like that kind of trope. But there was so many things I really enjoyed about this. I really enjoyed the twists that she put on the myths. I won't say too much because spoilers, but it generally follows the trajectory of Atalanta's life. But it changes things to make them feel more consistent as a plot, and it also introduces this female character who is not in the original myth, so obviously that romance then has an impact, and through the changes that she makes, I felt like Elizabeth Tammy was very much making a comment on ancient Greek society and ancient Greek mythology, and the sexism, patriarchy and misogyny that is ever present in a lot of that, and you know, pointing out the double standards, which I think still apply as messages that are relevant to modern readers, and I really enjoyed that. It made me think about these myths and some aspects of Greek religion in a fresh way, which is something I love when I read a retelling, because if you don't know, I am an ancient historian. But there's still loads to enjoy about this book if you're not a ancient historian. My one criticism, I would say, is I think just a result of this being a debut YA novel, and that was that I felt like some of the actions near the beginning of the book, the motivations and decisions that she made some of the characters make at the beginning, which she did in order to create the plot that then followed on, were a little unbelievable. Like, I think they came out of nowhere for me, and there wasn't proper motive established or thought process established for why some of the actions happened, very much just in the first few chapters. I understand that as an author she needed to make those things happen, to make her story happen, but I think a little bit more character development would have been good at the beginning. However, I will still read whatever Elizabeth Tammy brings out in the future, and I think her next book is actually based on maybe Norse mythology. It's based on a different mythology, and I will be really interested to see what she does with that and where she goes as an author. those are all the books I read in the second half of June. However, loads of fantastic books doing fantastic things. If you haven't checked out my mid-month wrap-up, again, I will link it down below, but I would love to hear if you have read or are interested in reading any of the books I've mentioned in this video, or have read other books by these authors, because like I mentioned, I'm really interested in reading some more Diane Setterfield. Love her. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys.